heroes at the time that picture was taken. They were the only support network that I had in Virginia. It was a very scary place to be. But they were worth it. Anyway, they insisted that we go to the pagoda in Norfolk. And that picture was taken just after Natalie, Alicia, and I got off the phone with Rochelle Shelley Campbell. They were trying to convince Miss Shelley to grab the kids and move to Virginia and get as far away from Ted as possible and just not tell Ted where they were at. The whole family's afraid of Ted, and for good reason. The story here, the Battle of Britain and the Polish lady. Alright, so the British, their damn sensibilities, right? World War I, we didn't get many of those hero stories from Great Britain on their aces. I mean, they still slipped out, but the British, among all the nations, the British were the ones that really tried to push the, we're not going to focus on heroes. And in the Second War, it was also very much the same. I mean, the Russians had their heroes. Hero of the Soviet Union. And the Germans, of course, they advertised the hell out of their heroes. Of course they did. By all means, why wouldn't they? So there's a lot of names that during the war were real famous. Like we all know about the Red Baron from World War I. The Germans advertised the crap out of that dude. And yeah, he still died, and that was devastating to the nation. When they don't want to tell you that somebody died, you know it's a devastating blow to morale. Just like in World War II, when the Japanese admiral who orchestrated the attack against Pearl Harbor got sniped down by a couple of P-38 Lightnings. Admiral Yamamoto. Yup. He was shot down because of radio messaging. He was straight up assassinated. Those Lightnings might as well been a sniper rifle against an unarmed civilian. I mean, it was rabbit food. That's what it was, you know? Now, one of the losses there is Poland. Poland is the most pathetically sad story of the whole war. Why did all of these people in Europe, French, the British, the Belgians, why did they all get wrapped up in that all at once? Plus, all of their colonies worldwide as well. We gotta figure it wasn't just Great Britain. They had colonies everywhere in the world. Same thing with the French. Colonies all over the place. And many of those places today are now independent nations. Independent nations of brown people. Brown people who won their sovereignty over the British Empire and the French Empire because of World War II. World War II freed a lot of people from imperial rule by the British and by the French. Now, Poland is the catalyst. Poland is what made Great Britain and France ultimately declare war. And, of course, Winston Churchill, when he was making his grand speech, 1939, he was already making pleas to the United States, please come save us. Please come save us. They always stop that speech when you hear it on one of the BBC channels. They always stop that speech just before you hear Winston Churchill making his unabashed and unashamed plea for help from the United States. And they still didn't enter the war for another 2 years. World War II in Europe was actually fought over Poland, over Polish freedom. Freedom from both the Russians and the Germans. And the Polish, they fought admirably. They fought in the Battle of Britain. And we get to hear about that, don't we? And once in a while, we see one of these movies or shows about 303 Squadron. Here in the United States, nobody gives two shits. They're like, D-Day, Omaha, woo! Go Broncos! Y'all know how it is. You guys get to hear us Americans, D-Day, everything's about D-Day, D-Day. And we whooped on Rommel, D-Day, D-Day, Patton, yeah. Woo! Go Eisenhower. I had an elementary school I went to called Eisenhower. But in the end, you know, we wanted to be friends with Russia. We, the British, the French, we didn't want the Cold War. We figured if we gave up Poland, even after the valiant sacrifices of so many Polish men and women for the cause, even after losing their own nation, they still it was being fought for Polish liberation at that point. The British bit off more than they could chew. They also realized that the Russian juggernaut was not something that they could handle on their own either. The British had to be afraid of Russia. See, there was a pact between Russia and Germany, a non-aggression pact. And Great Britain had to be afraid of all of its colonies being seized that were close to Russia. Russia might become part of the Axis even. And all of this behind the lines crap, you know, neither here or there. They were part of the Axis in the beginning. With the Russians invading as well, I mean, that technically did make Russia Great Britain's enemy. The Polish who fought in the Battle of Britain, we make movies about them today, but we always forget that there were female pilots in there. 3 of them. 3 female pilots from Poland fought in the Battle of Britain. We don't hear anything. We don't know their names. We don't know how many enemy planes they shot down. We don't know how many times they went up. We don't want to advertise that because, of course, the sensibilities of the British want to say, oh, we didn't have women fight our battles back then. Back then, we were manlier men. Back then, we weren't going to hide behind a skirt and blah, 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 all this sexist crap. But the thing is, there is a woman, at least one, that has been verified, and we still don't know her name. There's no story about her. There's no books written about her. She gets a couple of passing mentions in people's journals. Obviously, she was a part of the Battle of Britain. Obviously, the days and the battles that were fought, she was in the air on the days that the toughest battles were fought over the Battle of Britain, over the English Channel, and over Britain itself. So if this lady was on the front lines, she was fighting on the front lines, she was in the air and on the flight line with a squadron of men. That was an integrated squadron. And here's the thing. Screw British sensibilities. Those were Polish pilots. They were fighting for their people. They got stabbed in the back by the British. Now, we all get it. Everybody lost a lot of people. But those Polish pilots are heroes in their own rights. Their stories should be told. And why is it that those female pilots are completely forgotten in every single movie? Every one of them. No mention that they even existed. We even make movies about the women's auxiliary, don't we? We make movies about the female British pilots, even some of their names now. Now they can be recognized for their heroics. Those women who flew those airplanes from the repair stations or from the factories fresh to the squadrons they needed to be at. No combat experience. They knew just enough about the airplane to get it where it needed to go and land it safely. And of course, because of those women's specialty at takeoff and landings in all of the airplanes, they were some of the most highly trained pilots with the most hours in Great Britain through the entirety of the war. Just because of that. And we've got movies about them now. And we still have no recognition for the female Polish pilots. And yes, they fought with 303 Squadron. Well, at least the one that we have actual proof that she existed. But even with it being mentioned that there is actual proof that she exists, where's her name? What's her name? Why don't we know her name? I think it's great that there are people that we can look up to. There's a lot of women who fought on the Russian side during the war. There was even soldiers, of course, on the German side that were females during the war. And of course, we had spies on all sides and partisans on all sides. We had German Jews who were obviously women living out in forests throughout Germany, both men and women who were Jews, or Poles, or conscripts. And they all work together because they're trying not to get murdered, trying not to get shipped off to Warsaw. And of course, with that being Polish and German territory, there was a lot of Poles who did work for the Germans. They did a really good job for the Germans. They also did a really good job of helping people because they did their jobs. Because they did their jobs to help the Nazis, they were allowed to freely travel between places, or reasonably freely. And that allowed them to do a lot of very dangerous things that saved a lot of Allied lives. Like get our pilots out of there. When there was a downed pilot, you got to go to the partisans. You got to go to the freedom fighters. You got to go to the underground movements. You got to go to the street people. Ask for help. You got to go to the doctors that aren't too afraid to stand up for what's right or to speak up. You took that oath, now keep it. The doctors that, well, in Germany, we got to see what happens to the doctors that speak up. Now you're living in a concentration camp. Well done. We had preachers, priests, that used to be U-boat captains in World War I. There's a famous poem. It's called When They Came. It was written by a man named Martin Niemöller. And I recommend reading that poem. It's very touching, very moving, and very much explains why it is, if you are intelligent enough to understand the context. It explains why it is we're going through this today. Why it is that history is repeating itself, things are getting worse. The worse things get, the more people end up out here on the streets. And you know, you go down to the dingiest and dirtiest of society to get things done. There were a lot of the dingy and dirties of society, not just doctors and lawyers in upper echelon of Poland who happened to be blonde-haired and blue-eyed, so they were kind of sort of accepted. A lot of the Poles themselves did not like Jews. The anti-Semitic belief system that is very much alive today here in America and in Great Britain and also in Germany and Russia. Anti-Semitism is still a huge thing. You guys want to pretend it's just in the Middle East. That's the only place that anti-Semitism is still alive today in your minds. Many of you hear those anti-Semitic jokes or those anti-homosexual jokes or those anti-women jokes or anti-men jokes, and you don't stop to register how horrible that really is. When I was at Dallas Richmond's, he used to listen to comedy. He had a lot of mental problems, still has mental problems of his own, I'm sure. But the way that he tried to drown it out, he'd listen to comedy stations. And the thing is that the majority of the comedians, they were joking about rape. Like it's a funny thing. We have normalized it to the point that it's acceptable as a joke. In mainstream comedy, in TV specials. And of course, a lot of the propaganda that we have still to this day comes from those damned British sensibilities. And even though they've become far more laxed in their sensibilities in recent years, the fact is that they're not any less lax when it comes to their pride. Not every British citizen is that way, I am certain. We cannot blame all people in Britain for believing what they're told. Not everybody's that dumb. Not everybody is taught to have so much pride that they are blind to everything else. Where pride is so important that, well, committing horrible and what we may even believe today is inconceivable acts to try to pretty up your family name. A show, it's called Sharp's Rifles. And pretty much every British officer that you see in there is cast exactly that way. Their family name is more important than anything else. The achievements that they may add to that are more important than anything else. Cowardly on the battlefield. They are willing to do horrible, horrible things to other people in order to try to make themselves seem like they were somehow greater a person than they are. Many, many people that I thought were extremely good people showed that they're not the person they pretended that they were. Sure, they were nice, but they didn't care as much as they pretended to. Just like people didn't care about the Poles as much as they really pretended to, now did they? Where did Poland go at the end? Property of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. That's where it went. There was no freedom there. Those pilots who went to war were still outcasts. They didn't have a home to go to, and the British treated them like shit. And although we can now tell the stories of female British pilots, of course, that's because the British pride. It's not horrible to say that they were so undermanned that they had to use women to transport the aircraft. Transportation pilots They're just a taxi for the airplane so they can free up male pilots for the flight line and blah, blah, blah. But 303 Squadron, even with female pilots, you see the pictures of 303 Squadron. I'm like, I don't see any female pilots in there. Of course, how would we be able to tell the difference between a female pilot and a male pilot in those pictures? When were the pictures taken? What was going on at the time? Did they feel that it would be politically incorrect? Maybe those pictures were taken specifically for British newspapers and they weren't willing to put those women there. Or maybe it was a situation where the British sensibilities were that they just never wrote her flight time down or her flight hours or wrote her down as someone else. Or maybe abbreviated her name so that it kind of seems like a male's name or something. I mean, there's got to be some record of the lady existing somewhere, other than just a mention. And the people who were there who mentioned were there. Why wouldn't they mention her name? Why wouldn't there be more than just that? I mean, she didn't shoot anything down. But she was definitely there being shot at. She was with squadrons that were getting active combat time. And, the thing about there being 3 of them, like, what was that lady's name? I was just watching it the other day. I've seen her on like 2 other programs about the Battle of Britain. But she was talking about them and just one little brief thing for just a second. And then, like, the thing about that is that that's what it seemed like she was saying, and I am not exactly for certain because they cut her off before it was all finished, and you didn't get to quite understand the context of it. Now, for me, the only reason that it stuck out is learning about this stuff. I'm like, well, why is it that they wouldn't do those things? And you get into the politics of why certain people were never given the recognitions they deserved. And then, of course, in the 90s, we had this real big, massive overhaul of every World War II veteran who ever got a chicken scratch is getting a medal and a congressional diploma and a congressional medal of honor and all this other stuff. They're getting the Purple Heart. They're getting all sorts of things. We got people even in Chapel, Nebraska. In the 90s, there was a man in Chapel, Nebraska. He never got to finish high school because he went to the war. And when he came back, he went to the family farm and did what man people do back then. He did man things. You go fight the war. You do that for God. You do it for your country. You do it for your family. You come home. You go to work every day to take care of God. Take care of your family. Take care of the country. Things are different now. A lot of those people after the war did fade into obscurity. Some of them, it's very sad tales, and some of them, they went and had a family and minded their business and forgot the rest of us exist and stayed away from everything because they just didn't want nothing to do with that ever again. It's gross. Dead people are gross. So we got a lot of other people that we're just now starting to recognize. Like there was a movie recently made about a female Russian sniper and her achievements. And I guess there was going to be a movie actually here in the United States that was made about a female fighter pilot. It was an IL-2. That's an Ilyushin 2, which is not really not necessarily a fighter plane because it's technically a bomber. It's just a rugged piece of meat that can take a lot of flak. When you hear the word flak, that's an aeronautical term, and it's something that a lot of those folks that were pilots in the war or people who were artillery, they're firing flak up into the air too. So, I mean, flak was a term. If you're catching flak, it means You got shit blowing up around you. Things are not pleasant. But it was, I don't know. We can make movies about people like Vasily Zaitsev. Vasily Zaitsev in the movie Enemy at the Gates with Joseph Fiennes and God, what's that other doucher's name? I'm trying to remember it. I know his name is not Fuck Nugget, but that's literally the only thing coming to my mind at the moment. Because there's another movie he's in where he just plays like the biggest goddamn douchebag idiot fuck nugget you'd ever seen. He fits the role perfectly. Not the person himself, but he was able to portray the role perfectly. Anyway, we got a lot of people that are unconventional heroes. That doesn't mean they're not heroes. We have a lot of people who are not what you want to look at as your standard and belief. You want to have a certain belief. Your pride tells you that your belief is correct despite all of the evidence otherwise. The evidence shows that if we work together, friends and family, we can do something about this. Friends and family. But you got to be willing to do friends and family shit. Imagine what it feels like when you're the one busting your ass, hoping that you can go home someday, but you don't have one. And a lot of people promise to help you, but only if you'll fight their battles. A lot of people promise to help you if you spend your time and your resources doing what they want you to do. And then they want to sit in the back corner and decide how best to take it if something goes wrong. All right, well, how do I make it so it's not my fault? How can I finagle it so that I don't have to admit my part? But then, if things go real good, those people aren't like that anymore, are they? They're more of the, well, I want to take credit for what I did now. That all depends on how it's viewed. That's why when somebody is being harmed, somebody is being bullied, you really got to have a lot in you as far as intestinal fortitude in order to be the one to stand up and say something. People say, this is what I'd do, and that's what I'd do. And then you get to see all those people at that situation in Hood River. All those people who, they didn't, did they? How about here in Tillamook? All the people that said they would, and they didn't, did they? They saw it. It's on my YouTube channel. Those people exist. That I spoke with those people about it. That they admitted those situations exist. But I gotta be afraid to even leave my vehicle most of the time. And now I have to be afraid to drive it because my tags aren't legal. And I should be out panhandling and making money. That older feller is out there this morning doing that. So I'm letting him do it. Probably around 2 o'clock. It's about an hour away. He'll leave. And about that time, hopefully I'll be able to panhandle from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Sometimes I do all right. Those aren't peak hours by any means, but it's the Christmas season. I might make 10 or 15 bucks. Heck, I might get real lucky and make 25. I made 25 bucks one of them days last week or the week before. There's also atrocious weather, and I don't really have the ability to dry my stuff without spending money. And if I am as frugal as humanly possible, I will still have to go 2 to 3 days without eating. Just to dry it. in order for me to sit in this parking lot and kind of sort of get away with being here longer than I should be parked here. You know, I do have a lot of coffee cups. I throw them out 5 or 10 at a time. I mean, yeah, I'm a customer here, and I'm a frequent customer. And yeah, it's only $1 every time, but it's what I can afford. If there's stuff that I have to do that I'm not able to do in Starbucks, or if I have a shit ton of anxiety, you know, when I'm that anxious, I can't function to do anything. All I can do is talk. All I can do is explain to you the frustration of all of these things that I need to do. There has to be a family or a friend, a family member or a friend there. Or there has to be a guardian and an advocate to make these calls with me. This is what is supposed to be their legal checks and balances. These people who are supposed to help me with these things aren't helping me with these things. I try to be understanding. I try to speak up about, you know, their point of view. I try to put myself in their shoes when they tell me these things. When they tell me that they're afraid of losing their job, or they're afraid of their kids being targeted, or that their kids were targeted. You know, the thing with that is these people want me to be quiet about it. You don't stop abuse by shutting up. You don't stop abuse by looking the other way. You don't catch murderers by pretending they don't fucking exist. Moral of the goddamn story, I give credit where it's due. And if there are people who are not recognized and they did wonderful things for others and got screwed, you convinced them that it was going to be for them, and they gave their all, and in the end you threw them away like they were toilet paper and aren't even worth a mention. You can talk about the women in Russia who are doing those jobs. You can talk about the French women who are doing those jobs, carrying those rifles, pointing those guns, or flying those airplanes. But you can't admit that there were Polish women who were pilots, who were in the air, in the Battle of Britain, where the battle was happening, with the squadrons who were fighting those battles. They were assigned to those squadrons. Good to be radio. Thanks for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper and no victim left behind.